Have to be the panel right after break, I know, but thanks for coming back and hanging with us. My name is Brianne Doura-Schawohl, and I am so humbled and honored to be moderating this amazing panel. I've had the pleasure and privilege of working with all of these gentlemen, and this one's going to go by quick, you guys. I'm really excited because we're talking about something that I believe is so near and dear to this policy issue, and that is a holistic, comprehensive approach. Whether it's been in one of the 47 US states that I've worked in or 34 countries on this topic, I'm consistently trying to remind folks we can only be doing this well if we're addressing it from a holistic approach, whether it's research, prevention, education, treatment, and aftercare. And each of these gentlemen come at this issue from a very different perspective. I'm going to let them introduce themselves, but I'll also ask you all kindly if you might comment on the following after you do. From your perspective, what is the one promising prevention or early support strategy that could make the biggest impact? We're going to start easy, you guys. This is going to be a piece of cake. Biggest impact, one priority, go. We'll start with you, Dan.
Solve RG in a minute. I'm Dan Spencer. I'm Principal Consultant at Epic Global Solutions. If you're unaware, Epic Global Solutions are in prevention. We've been working in this area for 12 years. I've been privileged to work for them for the last 5 as a consultant, mainly working with gambling operators, but we also work with high-risk sectors such as school children and areas where risk is of a higher prevalence. Before that 5 years, I spent 16 years in active addiction myself. I'm in recovery from gambling addiction for the last 7 years. And what make Epics unique is a half of our employee base are in that position of being in recovery. So we use lived experiences to help prevent gambling-related harm. In answer to your question, your very big, broad,
you can solve it, right?
scary question, we'll solve that. I believe, personally, education and awareness is a really good start to kind of scaling this up. I think if you equip people in populations to help themselves as much as possible, we stand a really good foundation to prevent gambling-related harm. And I think when you think about the life cycle of a gambler, that has to hit all of those marks, from kind of education as a young person, financial literacy, into their vocation, being aware that you're in a high-risk population if you are. So equipping those people with the information in order to prevent harm themselves as much as possible.
Nicely said. Rasmus?
Yes, that was a new. You said my full name. Normally my North American artist name is Ras, but my formal name is Rasmus Kjaergaard, and I'm the CEO of Mindway AI. Mindway AI is a provider of sophisticated gambling behavior detection solutions, where we, as a spin-out of Aarhus University in Denmark, has invented the approach to use AI and human psychologist assessments combined with neuroscience to give a holistic, comprehensive view on the individual player's individual gambling behavior. We do that in currently 39 countries, and in total, our game scanner solution detects 9.2 million active players at this moment per month. So we have come some way in this, and the one promising prevention or early support strategy is, I would emphasize, is tracking of gambling behavior as this idea of clarifying the full picture of the gambling behavior for a much more individualized approach to the player earlier potentially, and providing this as guardrails. I often also refer to this as a lane keeping a system to keep the player in the middle of the road would be my choice here.
All right. The other Dan. It's a panel of Dans.
Yeah, Daniel Umfleet, founder of Kindbridge Behavioral Health. Kindbridge is a clinical network that stretches across the United States, into Canada, and into Puerto Rico. We do a lot of work with individuals who are harmed by gambling in a variety of ways. And we also work with a variety of different stakeholders across a variety of industries, operators in the United States being one of them. So one of the things that we've worked really closely with a handful of the larger operators in the States is connection points at a point in a player journey where the player might be putting their hand up or showing signs of fatigue or showing signs of distress. and then crafting messaging that goes to the player at that point in time, and then offering them a suite of services to inevitably, if required, go through a full assessment, get to a diagnosis, and into a care plan, pretty much at the point at which the person immediately presents. We've seen really promising results with this. In terms of things that I see that are sort of emerging and developing, I think it's important to understand how healthcare and healthcare data can inform prevention, and then how you can craft interesting systems that talk to specific populations. And I see a handful of industry stakeholders, sports leagues, all starting to sort of wrap their head around how do we craft solutions specifically for the populations that we're servicing. And I think that becomes critically important as we start talking about whole system approaches.
Very good. And last but certainly not least, Dan mentioned sports. I think you're our guy, Mark.
Right, thanks. I'm Mark Hicks from the NCAA. I've been at the NCAA for just about 20 years. Prior to that, I was a football coach, so did that for about a decade. Spent some time in secondary ed, so I have a unique perspective, having worked with young people at different stages in their development. But I guess that kind of also makes me the jock in the room. After listening to the first group of panelists, I realized I'm not nearly as smart as any of those folks. So, but what I think I can provide you is maybe a glimpse into a really narrow and unique subset of people that are alive and well in the area and in the space that you're working in. So hopefully today we'll share a little bit of that. I think when we talked about this question, I started thinking about maybe a little broader, but what are the things we're not doing? I know what we do, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but the longer I'm doing this, the more I'm convinced, though, that to make sustained impact is that we need to be influencing influencers, because we're talking about really young kids. And what I see is, in a regulatory type role, so what I see are cases that come before me where someone's gone afoul of the rules. And there's almost always a story about them having engaged in that behavior before they got to college. And what we're starting to see with the more regulation, or not necessarily more regulation, but good regulation, is proxy betting. And what we're seeing is parents giving access to their accounts to their young people. And so I just think in terms of like, that parent is an influence. It could be a friend who's engaging in the behavior. But when I'm thinking in a bigger picture, some of the things we aren't doing, and I'm pointing at us, is we haven't really tapped into what it means to influence the influencer. That's going to peer pressure or peer influence coaches, parents, friends, that type of group. So if I had, something big, I think that's probably what we're missing right now.
I think you kind of sold yourself short there about, I don't know what I'm talking about, because you teed us up really nicely for a very good conversation. I, too, was thinking about that, listening to that first panel, and I sit on regular calls with some of those guys about their research, thinking, I do not belong in this room. Anyway, we hear a lot, holistic approach, lots of buzzwords. What does it mean? What is a holistic approach, in essence? What's going well? What's not? And is one part of that holistic approach doing better than others? And this answer might vary from country to country, right? Their accents indicate they're not all North American based. So, Dan, Spencer, why don't you kick it off? Why don't you tell me, what is holistic approach, and what's making the most progress?
Yeah, if I go back to that life cycle of the gambler that I talked about earlier, at Epic we use a spectrum, an Epic gambling spectrum, to look at the breadth of harm and how it can progress or regress. Others use a continuum. You'll probably all be familiar with this kind of model where it goes from somebody who doesn't gamble to somebody who's introduced to gambling, perhaps starts to show some modicum of harm, and they kind of continue through there. So that's where we kind of look at our approach to a holistic approach at solving this. And we kind of put our efforts in three large areas. And one is early education. So in the UK, every year we see around 60,000 school children from the ages of 13 and up there's an ongoing debate about what is the right age to start that education, and we always make sure it's kind of age appropriate. Then we get into kind of collegiate university, and it becomes a stronger message using those that have lived experience to describe how their harm occurred, so that people have a reference point to go back to. What does that harm look like? You know, what exactly is gambling-related harm? I think that is a question that the public do not have enough information to answer for themselves currently. We, on a kind of public level, know that gambling has risks attached to it. We know that people do get harmed by gambling, but I don't think the public can answer that question about what exactly are we talking about other than the financial harm that happens. So that education, I think, is incredibly important. When you look at the rest of that spectrum going up, I think it then becomes about kind of detecting the behavioural markers, and Rasmus will probably give us some more information about that. We're lucky to have worked together with operators on that, which brings us to the second population. So the first one being kind of early education, the second one being detection of that risk at the point of play, detecting those markers of harm at an early stage, ideally keeping someone static within that player's spectrum or regressing back to kind of occasional play rather than heavy play. And then the third area is high-risk vocations. And that kind of brings me back to your question about which group is doing better than others, because in the early days of EPIC, we identified 7 vocations where the risk of harm was greater, from the criminal justice system to the military to sports to, I can't remember all 7 now, but because it quickly filtered down to the area where I think they are doing more than others, and that is in professional and collegiate sports. I think that risk has been strongly identified through research, you know, different numbers all around the globe, but you know, 2 studies I can think of, one from Norway identified athletes being 6 times more at risk than the general population. There was a study in the UK in 2014 which said that of male athletes, 9.1% reached that kind of problematic gambling, that kind of level, and the general population at that time from the Gambling Commission in the UK was 1.1, so 9 times more likely. We've found a lot of traction in the sporting world right now. I think it's very difficult to become a professional sportsman or woman in the UK without seeing one of EPIC's education sessions, which is where we wanted to get to. So we're working with the Premier League, the entire Football League Association, in rugby, tennis, cricket, golf, boxing now as well. And our biggest program to date is with Mark and the NCAA, and we're seeing great numbers there. People leaving our sessions with 90% more likely to seek help if they seek these kind of early detection markers.
So Mark, what do you think about this when we think about what is a holistic approach? You know, the NCAA does have some data that's out there that actually suggests many of the athletes that you bring in have actually gambled long before they start even day 1 in your program. So is it holistic at this current time? What are some of the opportunities and gaps? But I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely an area of growth for us. I've already alluded to it in my opening remarks, to just the need to get to people younger. Again, getting to the coaching community, I think, is really, really important for us. For those that don't know, we have rules that would apply both equally to student athletes, to adult athletic staff. So when we look at education, the audience is going to be very diverse: male, female, low socioeconomic areas, affluent areas, different ages. We have to have a really comprehensive strategy in how we message to those groups. And so, and it's not just us, and it's our friends at EPIC, but other people or entities within our system play a role in that holistic approach. So conference offices, if you're familiar with our organization, you've got the national office. There's going to be things that we do from that level. There will be conference offices who have then partnered with EPIC, or partnered with IC360, or have partnered with other people to come in and do presentations and education. They may even work with some of the regulators to do workshops. But anyway, it's a holistic approach for us, is subset of all these different people, but then different groups who will have voices along the path of the student athlete. But being mindful that we also have these adults, the staff they're very much involved in our ecosystem. So again, we got holes. I think we're going to be looking to continue to expand how we do our work, but it's probably going to be looking down as much as it's going to be looking just around, because I think getting to the influencers, as I said earlier, is just really critical.
So nothing within the United States as it relates to gambling and responsible gaming is uniform, right? Every jurisdiction has chosen to do it a little bit differently. And one of those components actually would relate to the embedment of early detection. So there's been one jurisdiction within the United States, I'm thinking of New Jersey, that has some standardization for markers of harm that are required to be a part of that holistic approach to responsible gaming policy. Rasmus, Dan mentioned in his definition of a holistic approach that early detection is key.
Yep. Yes,
US is
he
the
did.
anomaly here. Talk to us about the rest of the world. And
Yeah, so
and how much of that is important when we're talking about prevention and addressing responsible gaming?
yeah, so where we come from, I'm from Denmark and from Europe. Bearing in mind that online gambling has been going on the European side of the pond for a couple of more decades than over here. The American online market, when I say online, we are not splitting it apart between iGaming and sports betting as much in Europe, but it's still a newer market, earlier market than the European market, and some of those measures, in our experience, come in along the line. So the reason why I think you touch upon this, Brianne, is that what we see related to detection of the gambling behavior is mainly driven by regulation. So gambling operators tend to want to talk to guys like us if they have to, more than if they would like to. So on the other hand, we have developed this approach to find needles in a haystack, so to speak. So behind every customer ID, there is a human being. And gambling behavior is an individual human behavior. I'm looking at some of the psychologists in the room. And what we want to achieve with our AI-based approach, trained by a human psychologist, is to create this holistic view of the individual gambling behavior on customer databases that can definitely be several million customers a day. So the benefit we have found in a high accuracy doing so is actually we have less for the operators false positives, which is great because then that is some of their best players they don't reach out to because we genuinely believe, or have to reach out to due to regulation, we genuinely believe that people should stay entertained and not be bothered unless there's a reason. And the high accuracy gives us the opportunity to bother less of the ones we don't want to bother, meaning less false positives, but bother more of the ones who show signs of problems earlier, and also bother them or communicate with them or intervene with them at the stage they're at, with the right measures at the right channels, and without having quite a sophisticated system that tells you exactly on which continuum this specific customer account is. How can you then take the right measures? How can you train your staff to do the right things, to have your policies and processes in play? And markers of harm is a way to categorize this as well. So that is some of the elements we use when we support at the point of play, both online, now also land-based, and also both with operators and soon hopefully also with some European regulators.
So Dan Umfleet, did I cut you off?
No, you go for it. I'll come in
All
after.
right. Dan Umfleet, you're in the other end of this, right? If Rasmus is early detection, what about support? How important is it to embed support systems right within the ecosystem, especially in these high-risk populations?
Yeah, the weird thing when you look at multiple years of data that come through our clinic is you get a level of predictability. Like, why is it important to embed these systems so that people have a way to offboard? Is because I can tell you when you're going to spike. I can tell you when people are going to start coming through at a more rapid rate, right? I can tell you what the period of time is going to be where you need to really amplify responsible gambling messaging, where you need to really amplify mental health messaging and mindfulness messaging, and anything that might be important to a person who's struggling, right? So like, until we actually get a real good understanding collectively across an entire system approach of how we can use healthcare data to actually build prevention models, you know, this is what we're here to do, right? Like, this is the whole purpose of this conversation and this steering committee and this summit, right? If I go back to Sean's track A and track B, right? Like, this is it. How do we make them merge, right? How do we get on the page with everybody? And you got to bring all the stakeholders to the table and have all the right conversations, because from the things that we see inside of the data sets, you know, it's helped us understand more deeply how to build approaches with military. It's helped us understand what message is going to resonate with them, how to actually build content that they can attach themselves to and understand better. It's helped us understand that there's a serious lack of financial literacy out in the community. And so we've started building financial stability and responsible gambling initiatives to start to sort of build the necessary content and get the right people at the table to have the right conversations about what's seen in data sets that we can leverage to build better systems, right? So that's, you know, you want to talk about why it's important to make sure that healthcare and all of this are crossing over, is because really without those insights, it's very complicated to build systems.
Yeah, if I can just kind of connect those dots, I guess, between kind of early detection within operators and access to treatment and education, and just apply my own experience in this. If I go back to my days when I had a gambling problem, I think, how could that experience have been prevented? I think that the first thought that comes to mind is that we kind of measure this in the wrong way, and this is a personal thought of mine, is that countries around the world measure the prevalence numbers, right? And I'm a big believer that there will always be addiction. There will always be gambling addiction. You know, you can look at this the other way around. I don't believe widespread gambling companies are predatory towards their customers or abusing their customers. I actually think there's more customers abusing the gambling operators' products, you know, rather than the other way around. But I think the way we should be measuring it really is longevity. You know, how long does it take for someone to start showing these signs of harm, to be detected, have the intervention, and have a successful outcome and get into recovery or treatment? You know, because for me, that was far too long. It was 16 years from the point of me gambling more than I could afford up until the point where I had to admit the problem. And that's because every time I hit this big win, I reset the clock. I was good. I paid off my debts. I got rid of the bailiffs at my door, but then I went back into it, and I was on this cycle of about 3 years of going up that spectrum, hitting a big win, resetting it, thinking I didn't have a problem anymore because the financial problem had gone away. And when we started working with Raz's company, with a joint client of ours with Entain, we upended their algorithm, because the number one thing they were looking for, and this is why I didn't get caught back in the day, the number one thing they were looking for was total amount of money spent. And I didn't come on the radar for that because I was low stakes, right? But I would have hit every behavioral marker in Mindway's model, and I would have hit every behavioral marker in Entain's model that they've got now that we work with them. And the number one kind of quantitative marker there is now number of transactions. And I would have been off the scale on that because I was small stakes, but I went back again. So that kind of, that longevity, shrinking that time between the early detection, because I strongly believe, like, the bank would have known I had a problem before I knew I had a problem. The operator would have known I had a problem before I knew I had a problem. You know, I was almost the last one to know. You know, even I survived 2 suicide attempts. My family was all around me. It was, you know, a whole thing. I didn't realize I had a problem until I was like 2 weeks into recovery. You know, I was the last one to get the message. So making sure we pick up all these early detection markers and then do the right thing at the right time is extremely important.
To me, that really brings home the point that we're really lacking that education and understanding, right? How many people universally believe that a gambling problem equates to a money problem, or that it's not a true addiction or a disease, it's just a moral failure? There's such a lack of understanding in so many places, particularly I'm thinking in the US, where people just don't truly understand, and I think that could be a game changer here, so to speak.
Can I add a little bit here to this?
No.
Brilliant. No, that's fine. Yeah, and then on top of this, then you also have a situation. So we are in the crossfield between science, we are spin out of a university, operators and other stakeholders, regulators as well, and have operationalized this science we have had. But we also see in our experience that there is some sort of operational challenge because we detect and help operators to find at-risk and problem gamblers, those needles in the haystack. Some of them in the severe stages are actually addicts or have developed an addiction. So then there's a crossfield between a commercial company, a gambling operator, and actually healthcare sector in the country we are operating in, or the operator has their license. And what are the different responsibilities there from the professional point of view, who do what and when? So there's a lot of overlap that needs to be handled there as well, I think.
Something was said on the very first panel about academia, and they're facing this bit of an inflection point or a crisis, right? This perception that if they work with the industry and other stakeholders, that their work could either be compromised or not as credible. I guess my question for all of you is, what are those cross-sectional relationships like when we're talking about a holistic approach? How important are they? And are each of you facing a bit of a crisis of your own when it comes to working with others? You can go right down the line, right, gentlemen. I want to hear from you all. Jeff, it's really good.
You want it raw? Right. I think there's reality, right? And then I think there's perception, right? And from where I sit, like, we've been working in this space now for 5 years, and the most collaboration, the most cooperation, the most interests, the most progress has all been made with us on the operator side of the table, 100%. I think there's what has to be sort of pointed out here is like, healthcare needs just as much help understanding how to approach this through the health system as operators need help understanding how to address communications with players on their platform that are in harm's way, right? And I think it's, from a healthcare perspective, we are licensed clinicians, we're doctors, we're medical people, right? And for there to be any suggestion whatsoever that because I have contracts with operators, that is gonna somehow influence the outcome of a person going through care is nuts. It's just nuts. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, if I add to that, I mean, we've been in business for 12 years in prevention, and it took 6 years for Paul, our CEO, to take the first cent from a gambling operator, and he was worried about this, from the start. But that was really the moment of growth for Epic in making a true impact in what we do. As Dan said, we've been able to reach so many more people. We've been so much more well-informed. We've been on the inside, learning from the data, being able to target the right people. We've never taken a gambler operator's logo into a school. We've never taught a school kid how to place a bet. We've never supported a promotion or held back on a piece of research or anything like that during the time that we've been working with operators. We have, however, been accused of all of those things. And where we come up against kind of anti-gambling campaigners, that's where we get the most flack from. This has transcended into politics in the UK at the moment. We're having a big change in the way that funding reaches research, prevention, education, and treatment. It means that there will be 10 times the amount of money available. However, the way it's going at the moment is they're considering excluding anyone that's worked with an operator to be part of that system in the country. If they do that, they will lose all the experience of every business that's fought all that way to be where they are today, to have the impacts they have. And instead, the money will go to startups that have not had that relationship with the operators. I believe that will have a catastrophic effect on the operators' their desire to provide funding to positive social impact as part of their ESG goals. So sincerely hope that doesn't happen, but that's the way it's going.
All right, I'm sorry to do this, Mark and Rasmus, but I think we got to jump to the last question. We just
That's
have
fine.
a few minutes, and as moderator, I have been given the privilege to give you all a magic wand. Pretty cool, right? I wish I had a magic wand. All All right, so here it is, the last question. The magic wand. If you could drive one priority action to strengthen prevention and early support across high-risk sectors, what's it for, gentlemen? Right down the line. Dan, we'll start with you.
Let me start. I would use my magic wand to stop people thinking there's a magic wand that can solve RG.
Only about that easy, right?
Thank you very much for that.
There is no silver bullet. There is no magical answer to this. There will always be gambling addicts. There will always be addictions. But we need to take that holistic approach to gambling-related harm prevention across and treatment and relapse prevention as well. Let's not forget it's got the highest relapse rate of any addiction as well. We need to look at the entire life cycle and come together and collaborate.
So I still have my magic wand, despite you have just...
I'll take mine back.
Brilliant.
I'll cast mine at the end.
Perfect. So my magic wand would go to a hope that operators in the future would have the guts to reach out to players earlier than they have currently, based on systems like we and other great folks provide. Currently, that's unfortunately not the case. Whereas operators do tend to reach out slightly later or maybe even too late under the perception, we are working on changing that, under the perception that such systems like we provide steals revenue, which is then over player protection in the sense of reaching out earlier.
I see a flywheel. If anybody's familiar with the way flywheels work, right? Where it would be really lovely if we would just have it mapped out what stakeholders' job is to do what to make everything work in symbiosis. That would be fantastic. If I had a magic wand, that's what I would do, right there.
If I had a magic wand, I'd wish myself another magic wand, right? You get more wishes. How many wishes you give the genie or get from the genie? But I think it goes back to what I said earlier. I think helping change the thought process that this is a serious issue. And we still get a lot of, shrugging of the shoulders. We see alcohol, drug addiction, things like that as a much more serious issue. What people fail to realize in my ecosystem, our ecosystem, is that these student athletes that may have a problem, and luckily it's a small number, not a great number, but they're the ones playing at games. So now we have an integrity risk on top of a mental health issue, right? So it's almost compounded in our ecosystem. So I think changing the perception that this is not a big deal, that we can be dismissive of it, I think is probably a big win for us if we can get there.
I want to thank these fine gentlemen for getting us back on track. We really are at the top of the hour, so nicely done, even though we got a late start. I think it's very clear from what you've all shared that this has to be addressed in a multifaceted way, from education to early detection to comprehensive support, and not just those vulnerable risks, those that touch those athletes, for example, such as coaches and parents. There's a lot of work to be done. Maybe we can get Dan's flywheel as part of the planning process. I'd like to thank you all for your participation.